Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know, every now and then you're browsing the internet, whether it be the browse feature on YouTube or the homepage on Twitter, you'll just be perusing around and accidentally you'll stumble across the most based video of the year. You know, every now and then it happens. Sometimes the algorithm works and simply just promotes the best video, and that's exactly what happened here. Holy frickin' moly, do we have something going mega viral on X. And yes, I know I did it. I've been working really hard to make sure I call it X and not Twitter. But anyways, there's a clip that was posted literally yesterday, and it's already amassed over 22 million views as I'm recording this video. Some really interesting stuff. So without further ado, let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so a pretty serious topic of discussion today. We're talking about slavery, one of the world's greatest manifestations of evil, essentially the antithesis of what we believe in today in terms of individual rights and human rights. I think that's something we can all agree with, but also a topic of discussion that I think has been dishonestly weaponized. And that's where this video comes into play. If you listen to the CRT people, you know, the Black Lives Matter, CRT, woke academics, if you listen to the teachings of the 1619 Project, America is superbly and uniquely evil, and America must atone for its horrible past of slavery. You know, the way that these concepts are taught within left-wing academic circles is almost as if Europe and the United States ran a slavery monopoly and subjugated the world for hundreds of years. That's the narrative. The narrative is that Western European nations, from UK to Spain and the United States of America, had a total monopoly on the slave trade, as if those were the only countries that were engaging in the practice. But obviously, that couldn't be further from the truth.
The first point is that everyone had slaves, okay? People of all colors became slaves for economic reasons, because of war, because slavery, as odious as it was simply a normal way of life. Arabs were extracting millions of black African slaves centuries before Christian nations did, for about 13 centuries, compared to the 3 centuries European nations ran the Atlantic slave trade. Arabs marched African slaves across the Sahara Desert, and as such, they died more often. It was customary to castrate them, and many died from this practice. The Arabs also enslaved over 1 million white European Christians. The term slavery, in fact, comes from the word Slav. The Slavs inhabited Eastern Europe and were taken by the Muslims of Spain in the 9th century. Not to mention that Africans had been enslaving each other for thousands of years. The point is that slavery, the second point is that slavery was not about race, and that's important. It was not about race. The only reason we think it's about race is because philosophers like David Hume in the 18th century ranked human beings and put Africans at the bottom, saying that they had no souls. The Enlightenment imposed the concept of race on a practice that had been going on for centuries in order to justify that practice. And why did they have to justify it? And this is the point. Because people in the West began to question slavery's moral validity. The fact is that people of all colors owned slaves, both as part of the Atlantic slave trade and outside of it. In the United States and Caribbean, black people owned thousands of black slaves, and so did the Native Americans. Nearly 20,000 of the Native American 5 civilized tribes sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, fighting to keep slavery alive. 28% of the black population who were free in New Orleans pledged their support to the Confederacy. All of the 13 southern states of the Confederacy had substantial numbers of black slave owners. There were more than 250,000 free blacks, and nearly 4,000 of them were slave masters, who owned more than 20,000 slaves. The practice of slavery was legal, after all. We need to remember that governments did not own slaves. Slave owners did. In fact, the US government fought a war to end slavery. How much should the descendants of the 400,000 Union soldiers who lost their lives fighting to free the slaves pay to the descendants of the slaves they freed? Giving people lump sums of money does not work. Economists often point to the Georgia Land Lottery of 1832, in which parcels of land were distributed randomly. What happened to the descendants of those who were lucky enough to be given this land? Are they the richest families in Georgia? No. In fact, within one generation after the distribution of the Georgia land, one could not distinguish between those who had been given land and those who hadn't. Certainly my own direct experiences of working for 20 plus years in the inner city with families on welfare demonstrates this time and time again. Rather than give a man a fish, it is always better to teach him how to fish. All giving the fish does is make the giver feel better. Reparations might relieve white people of their guilt, but it will do little else. So back to my initial question. Why are we only discussing whether the West should pay reparations for slavery? Because while slavery was common to all civilizations, only one civilization developed a moral revulsion against it very late in its history, Western civilization. Not even the leading moralists in other civilizations rejected slavery at all. Rather than be ashamed as Westerners, we should stand proud for having led the world out of a mentality where slavery was the norm, and we should vote against this motion. Thank you.
Look, I've seen a lot of people attempt to make this argument, but very few people have done it so eloquently as this incredible speaker did during this event. The reality is that the woke left, I think motivated by racial animus, hatred, and revenge, they want to rewrite the history books entirely. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because Democrats are constantly going on and on about Republicans wanting to burn books and ban books. I mean, Joe Biden even said that recently when he was pandering at an HBCU.
I never thought I'd be in a president at a time when there's a national effort to ban books, not to write history, but to erase history. They don't see you in the future of America, but they're wrong. To me, we make history, not erase it. We know black history is American history.
Those Republicans want to get rid of black history. That's essentially the claim that leftists make, that right-wingers want to remove teaching slavery from the American education curriculum. But that couldn't be further from the truth. What people are protesting is the total bastardization of American history on this particular issue, the ignoring of all global context and even local context, a twisting of the story in order to frame their preferred narrative, that they're the victims, they're oppressed, and they're fighting against this grandiose evil that must be stopped and reformed. In other words, emotional manipulation, rewriting of history to turn the next generations of young people growing up into Democrat activist super soldiers. You know, that's gotta be the plan. What's the other motive here? Clearly, the only motive is power. The idea here is to weaponize history, to weaponize race, and most importantly, to weaponize human emotion and the human consciousness, to feed these next generation coming up a constant stream of anti-American propaganda. Look how horrible this country's track record in world history is. Go protest, go burn down buildings. Go tell everyone how terrible those Republicans are. That's obviously what the plan is. Mobilize a massive, radicalized youth mob through these obvious manipulation tactics. And as sad as it is to say this, to a certain extent, their plan is working. They are radicalizing the youth. And that is the importance of free platforms like X.com, where ideas get to flourish. Stuff like this bounces around to 20+ million views, and considering this released 24 hours ago, that's probably just scratching the surface. But as this happens, slowly but surely the masses start to wake up. People start to realize America isn't the worst, most oppressive, most evil nation on earth. No, quite to the contrary. I mean, let's make the argument. The claim from the left is that the United States is an evil country that essentially needs to be overthrown and reformed, a country that needs to atone for its uniquely evil presence on the world stage. That's the claim, but the reality is the complete opposite. I think it's important, first of all, to acknowledge that slavery was a pervasive institution throughout human history. The United States of America didn't invent slavery. Slavery existed before the United States was even founded, before Christopher Columbus even discovered the Americas. The practice of slavery spanned across different continents, cultures, civilizations, from ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt to China and numerous African societies. And that context, which the left wants to omit from the conversation, is clearly relevant here, right? It's important to acknowledge that historical fact before making these grand assertions about which nation passes the purity test and which doesn't. And it's also probably important to note the United States' role in ending slavery. America, despite its relatively short history compared to ancient civilizations, made significant strides in addressing the institution of slavery. The founding principles of the United States, as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, laid the groundwork for the eventual abolition of slavery. The statement that all men are created equal was most likely a catalyst to the moral and philosophical basis that spurred the abolitionist movement. The the United Kingdom and the United States of America are the two places on earth who should get credit for ending the horrible practice of slavery, for setting a new standard worldwide, and even more importantly, for then standing by that standard, applying that standard, and fighting for that standard, and in some cases even policing that standard, providing aid, accepting refugees, yada yada, the list goes on. What happened in the United States and what happened in Europe changed the world forever. It's the reason life is so great these days. And we know that to be true, but we're supposed to accept teachers promoting this ignorant ideology to our youth so the left can turn the next generation into DNC activist puppets. Give me a frickin' break. That's it. Give me a frickin' break. I was gonna keep saying things, but honestly, I think that pretty much wraps it. That's the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.